itself, of course, is quite wide to have. So they're not. This is not a really developer scene. This is more a blockchain application and blockchain technology scene.
Interesting. Okay. Gökhan, thank you for joining us. We're just waiting for everybody else to get in, and then we'll be starting our discussion shortly. There was a point that you mentioned.
Alexander, just for the point, so your face is a little bit in the shadow, so maybe you want to.
Yeah, it's where I'm currently sitting is a window coming from one specific area, or a light coming from a specific area. So try.
Maybe that's better. That's better. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
There was a question that I wanted to ask you, given what you just said about the head of the Sandbox initiative. So I'm assuming that's the blockchain sandbox, the European blockchain sandbox that's being established.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Hi, Andreas. Thank you for joining us. We'll be joining soon. Now we're just waiting for everybody else to join us.
Well, thanks for this invitation. Good to see you.
It's good to see you too. How have you been?
Very well, thanks. Busy. You know how busy things are getting. So yeah, I'm quite excited about that, and looking forward to hearing what you're presenting.
Thank you. Thank you. Hopefully, we will bring something that all of the people coming to listen will find either interesting or, hello, Patricia, find interesting and or useful to either them personally or professionally. So that's the goal. Hopefully, the main goal is to have an interesting discussion, which I think that's going to be something that will be achieved nonetheless. Hi, Huho. How are you doing? Hugo, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Hello.
Perfect, perfect. Just to make sure that
that it works.
Connection is going well, and I see Anand as well should be here. Can you hear us, Anand?
Alex, are you about to mute everyone and then the panel will unmute yourself, or do you want people to mute themselves?
So at the very beginning, so I think there'll be another maybe 5 to 10 minutes just to make sure that everybody has time to get in. We'll make a general just announcement for people to mute themselves and also put their cameras off. And then afterwards, we'll continue.
Hi, guys. Excited to join the session. Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marika. For everyone who's already joined us, thank you for being on time. We're going to wait a little bit for the rest of the participants to be able to join us. And then after that, we will kick off our panel discussion. Just as a little introduction, we will have 2 more minutes where we will give everybody who is still joining us time to join. I will repeat this when we start the actual event itself, but for all those who aren't panelists, if you could please turn off your cameras and mute your microphones for the presentation itself, preferably also pinning the speakers who we have. Afterwards, when there's a general Q&A session, then feel free to turn on your cameras and your microphones as well, but for the purpose of the discussion, to have them off for that stage. Thank you. All right, then I think we will start from here. Anybody else who is coming will just join us in the meantime. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this online event in association with Dutch Blockchain Week, a panel discussion on the topic of food traceability, customer-driven or legal obligation, where we'll be discussing the general idea of traceability within retail, how the consumer is factored into this, what are current trends that we can see, and generally what does the future look like and how we can be a part of this. Some steps of decorum, if you may, for the presentation. While we are in the panel discussion itself, if you could please turn off your microphones and your video in order for the focus to be on the panelists, preferably also pinning them so you can always see them. And then afterwards, when there is a general Q&A session, then feel free to turn on your microphones and your video cameras so we'll be able to see who is giving the question. Without further ado, let me give a brief introduction to our 3 panelists. We are joined today by Anand Gavai, who is an associate professor from Twente University, Hugo Burns, who is a sustainability strategist and founder of Hugo Burns Consultancy, and Joost Volker, a go-to-market strategist and blockchain expert and founder of Stellar.it. Thank you all for being here today. And I will immediately jump into a question, which is probably setting the baseline for the entire discussion. Why is there a need for traceability in general, but specifically for food? And what are sort of the driving factors that can be credited with the adoption or necessity for such a technology or tool? Maybe Joost, we can start with you and then we'll move to the other members of the panel.
Yeah, sure. So if you look at food, a particular food supply chain, I think supply chain is one of those domains that is one of the biggest use cases for blockchain traceability. Exactly, it's for traceability in itself, and blockchain could help because in the food supply chain we're talking about different tiers, multiple tiers, and all those multiple tiers, they may have different sizes, may have different businesses. As well, there are a lot of handovers across the supply chain. So I think in that sense, transparency across those boundaries, across those different gateways in the food supply chain, particularly up to the retailer, as well into the B2C world, are key to improve transparency or the provenance tracking of food as such. So I think this is why food is in the core of, I would say, blockchain adoption for traceability.
So from what I understand, you're saying that there is both a benefit for both the business aspect, but for the consumer aspect as well. Hugo, from the point of view of, say, for example, sustainability, is this something that is then levied more towards the consumer? Their sort of worries and wants about knowing that their food that they're consuming is sustainable, or is this something that we can also bring to the businesses downstream the supply chain as well?
Yeah, I think it's actually both. So first of all, yes, consumers more and more want to know what they're actually buying. Where does the product come from? Was it produced in a sustainable way? How about the workers that produce the product or the ingredient of the product? So that is really consumer facing. But there is a lot of information that probably isn't that interesting for the consumer, but is of importance for the retailer or the manufacturer of the product, because more and more they are supposed to manage what happens in the supply chain, and to be able to manage it, it also does mean that it's not looking back on hindsight, where did this product come from, what happened, but where does it come from and what's happening with the product that I'm buying and selling. So I would absolutely say it's both. It's of interest for as B2B information, but certainly also certain information very much of interest for the consumer.
Interesting. And Anand, if I can come quickly to you, Hugo mentioned that for businesses with regards to traceability, a lot of the information that they might put onto the traceability platforms that they would be using, that information to them might be of a sort of private nature, things that they don't want to actually put into the public, or if this is, say, for example, a shared traceability platform, things that they don't want other competitors to find out or have information on. So what are the possibilities there in order to be able to sort of either mask that information or essentially have it in a way where you make things traceable, but you don't necessarily make the exact information available to everybody within the platform?
Yeah, I think this is one of the major issues when it comes to retails, where there is a business interest, and among the competitors also it is important that people are hesitant to share all their data. In general, when we try to address this kind of issue, what we try to tell our clients is try to make the data as open as possible and as closed as necessary. So that is, in short, we try to use them. And we also sometimes try to help some of our clients to identify which pieces of information are sensitive, so that they can keep it for their own business advantage, and share the rest that is most of the time mandatory by the authorities, for example, or other stakeholders which may be of interest.
So really, if I'm understanding correctly, in order to be able to have this process be done in the most beneficial light for all parties involved, it is a discussion between all of the parties in order to understand.
Yeah, so what happens generally is that you have different kinds of privacy concerns that are put together in a sort of a collaboration. So the rules of this collaboration have to be understood by each specific party. And based on the GDPR regulations that are put in place, all these parties come together to decide on which specific sections of the data needs to be made available to all the stakeholders into the chain.
Very interesting.
And to the point of another thing that's interesting here to say, of course, because people may be hesitant of sharing data, but if you better define or better maybe even do some regulations, people may trust then the technology better that you can share certain information. Eventually, you may not know which information you might better share for the better use, for the better use, for better good of the whole chain. So that's something as well in those blockchain systems, or at least traceability systems. It's good to understand. Of course, you have data going from tier n to tier n minus one. But there may be data that's beneficial for the whole chain that should be shared. It may be masked, but it could be shared because the whole efficiency of the chain might improve from that.
Yes, Jos, you are completely right. So once we generally, people try to define these policies at a more collaboration level, and these policies can be brokered in an automated way. And then these policies are actually driven by the whole community, so that everybody is aware of which segments of their data that need to share for the common good, and which can be kept for their advantage from a business perspective.
So for the development of such a traceability system, it sounds to me as if there needs to be a growing amount of trust, where at first it's going to be a process where you're crafting the solution together with the providers. And then afterwards, once there is a greater trust within the system, that's when it can sort of start to perhaps organically grow. Looking maybe more towards the current situation, and Hugo, I'll turn to you for this. Given your experience within retail, what has been achieved so far? What are the trends that we see within traceability of food products in the market generally? Are there products that are particularly targeted, or is it something that's still sort of depending on individual pressures or individual whims of retailers?
Yeah, that certainly used to be the case. So I always said, well, we run as retailers, we run the fastest for the NGO that shouts the loudest. But that's changing. And another trend is certainly, which I already touched upon, that from looking back, what happened, we are now changing to what happens. So knowing in advance, or knowing real time what is going on. A good example of trace back is what happens in the case of a food safety issue, for instance. So something's wrong with the product, and you want to find out, well, first of all, which ingredient caused the issue, but then, of course, you want to find out what happened there. So that's on hindsight. You trace back to the origin, and then you try to remedy the issue. What we see now is that information needs to be live, it needs to be on the spot. And that is certainly helped by the latest development that there's more and more legislation coming up. The EU has a lot of specific legislation requiring for information to be shared in supply chains. But the EU is not alone. You see a similar trend in the UK, and you see it in the US, maybe at a slightly slower speed at the moment. So, for instance, there is the EU deforestation regulation, and it's actually very specific. There are commodities that are linked or can be linked to deforestation that are in scope, and you need to know exactly where that particular product has been produced, so on what plot of land, to be able to then make a statement, and there was no deforestation, because you're not allowed to sell anything that can be linked with deforestation. And that information needs to be shared in the supply chain, because every operator in the supply chain needs to make a similar statement. We have verified through the information that we have received that there was no deforestation. Another one that's there, and that's very soon we'll even get an update, is information to be shared in fish supply chains, where specifically it's stated that information again needs to be shared throughout the supply chain, so that at the end of the day, the retailer knows exactly which species of fish caught where the retailer is selling. Over time, processed fish will be added to that equation. But thirdly, there is a due diligence directive coming up. It's not there yet, but it can be expected any moment. Maybe still this year, I don't know, but they're debating it in Brussels while we speak. And this particular piece of legislation says that you need to identify the risks in your supply chain. And if the risks are high, you need to mitigate that risk. But how do you do that if you don't even know what's in your supply chain? So again, it's very important to understand where do products come from. And let's not forget, products don't always, in particular in food, come from the same location year round, because in many countries there are seasons. So in summer you might products in the northern hemisphere, but the same products you would buy in wintertime from the southern hemisphere. So it's very important to have that kind of real life information available to, well, simply to be able to manage it.
And to that point you guys make is what you see, of course, in the food industry, very much the focus has been, of course, on nutritional information, and that's what you see changing, of course, from not purely but nutritional information to contextual information, to then, of course, ESG information, which is of course, it is in the benefit of the reader to know, but very soon, or even already, EU, of course, putting down regulation that you should be able to be audited on this. You should be reporting. Of course, a lot of people do report them already, but then you could question how do they report. So even if they do report, is this reporting verifiable? And I think that's the key thing here as well, that it's taking it from data granted to verifiable data, whatever the data is in context of the food, not just the nutritional information, but all the circumstantial and contextual information as well. There's not food safety, but health and safety as well, labor, etc., etc. That's coming much more into policy, but also into probably in business ethics. So in the boardroom, that's taking more and more it's becoming, I wouldn't say it's not the core discussion, but more and more in boardrooms, it's becoming part of the discussions.
Yeah, also, I mean, I like the point that you raised about deforestation. I think this is also getting more and more important at the EU level. So it is more emphasis is nowadays put into the biodiversity on the part where the food is produced before it comes to the plate of a consumer, for example, from farm to fork. And there are certain parameters that are made available by the EU in the form of data that the retail can leverage on to make this kind of claims for their consumers and also for all the stakeholders.
So what we're seeing is a general development of trends on both a legislatory angle, but also from perhaps internally, whether this is pressured by legislation or sort of a greater consideration for either sustainability metrics or other sort of other such metrics to make traceability and sort of provenance mainstream within the products that are being put out onto the shelves, essentially. We are a part of blockchain. We are a part of Dutch Blockchain Week, and we've also mentioned now a Dutch or a blockchain traceability solution. But with incoming legislation definitely requiring such traceability in the future, there's going to be a myriad of different means by which traceability can be achieved. What sort of possibilities would be out there, and how sort of does perhaps blockchain differentiate itself from those maybe traditional traceability systems, or what can be viewed as traditional traceability systems? Joost, if we can start with you.
Sure. Well, there have been traceability systems, of course, either in ERP systems or in recall systems. They have been there for a long time, of course, and they could be, of course, they are forward-looking. Of course, they are dealing with POs, so they're based on financial metrics or supply chain metrics. So they've been there, but I would say they are kind of way unilateral, just a feed forward, not a feed backward. And secondly, they still live by the fact that that one company, or maybe one or two companies, that they manage the full supply chain. Where of course we see a myriad of companies, till tier N, but also new entrants. Then blockchain with a more decentralized function makes it easier for new entrants to join, also for larger companies to deal with smaller companies as such, and that makes it interesting because it could grow the larger economy. So I would think there's a difference. So in tracking, pure tracking, it's still data, right? But storing or accessing the infrastructure from a decentralized point of view, be able to share the information, to own part of the information, and then to trace back and trace forward. That is, I think, some of the technology aspects of blockchain that make it interesting to apply to traceability. So I think this is the one, and of course there are much more other deeper technologies, like, for example, the way you deal with security, the way you deal with the fact that you can set the whole idea of nodes that represent either organizations or individuals or NGOs or even systems. That, I think, an interesting concept which could improve traceability as a whole. What we already know from the ERP systems and the recall systems, etc., as in place.
Perhaps a question then about the way that information is stored. And Ananda, I'd like to hear your opinion on this. What are the privacy implications? Are there any privacy implications when dealing with a decentralized platform versus something that could be more traditionally centralized as a singular database?
Yeah, so actually, there have been quite a lot of evolution in this domain of privacy infrastructure, right? Blockchain, by definition, it has a lot of nodes into the network, and every single node in a network has a ledger that records the transactional information. Okay. Now, what happens is that also in the past, that people used to have centralized databases where all the data remained in one place, where all the different partners in this collaboration used to centralize their data and used to use modern machine learning algorithms on top of that. But now, because of the privacy regulations and also because of more awareness of the data, people and the governments like to keep this data at decentralized locations. So the trend, what is happening is, like, when you want to run your machine learning models or algorithms, what you want to do is that instead of the data coming to the algorithms, you want the algorithms to go and visit different data locations and learn from this data on a common good, for a common good. That's the idea behind it now. And blockchain is one of the very good examples where all the data that is all the nodes in the organizations are decentralized, and the transaction is recorded. So this is one way of dealing with privacy and security of data.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
So we've established that traceability now is something that would benefit, or firstly, it's being necessitated by incoming legislation. We've seen how it can be looked at as a benefit for these companies. What, Hugo, if I can come to you, what are sort of the reasons why perhaps retailers haven't really adopted traceability as a feature by themselves or previously? Why has there been a lag, if you will, for traceability in the market?
Yeah, there are multiple factors to this. So one of the main factors is also a lack of traceability protocol, that we do not have standardized traceability protocol. We do not have that in place at this moment. And also, when it comes to small retails, they do not have that much capacity and the resources to implement this novel and the new technological solutions to this platform. And in governmental organizations, there is also sometimes observed that there is a lack of interest in implementing these solutions that already exist. So these are some of the main things that we observe it most of the time.
Yeah, Alexander, I can't really add to that. It's exactly what's going on. At times, it seems that things, at least, were too complex for the retailers to truly handle because of the complexity. They just didn't manage to properly set up the systems.
And this all comes back to the trust, then it's a little bit difficult to convince when it comes to technology. What can be convincing for a retailer that they should adopt this technology? So that's a major hurdle that we often observe.
So there has to be.
Yeah, and maybe one more thing, of course. I think the first blockchain projects in retail were very much, I would say, single objects to be traced, which was easy to do. But actually, the value add is not that much. I think it's much more interesting when you have compound products to be traced, because then you talk about risk, you talk about liability across which is a bigger thing. So the step from tracing a single object or a single whatever, a single pineapple, if you take it, and that was the first POC that I think that worked well, but didn't deliver that much value. But going into compound products, which is across the whole industry, not only for food industry, that's where I think the bigger gain is, because that's where the bigger risk is also for the retailers. I think we have to make that step towards not just tracing a single pineapple for the good of the B2C world, but compound products, ingredients to trace back for actually really knowing what do you have in your hand, what actually do you trade, what actually do you sell, or what do you buy. And that needs to come.
Yeah, fully agree. I remember a blockchain system that was set up at the very beginning when blockchain first was discussed in the food world. And an Italian wine producer had created a blockchain so that by scanning a QR code on the label, you could identify where the wine came from. Well, they could also have just read the label. What we're truly facing is, and we always talk about supply chains, but it isn't a chain, it's a network. It's hugely complex. Think of the proverbial pizza. It may have 40 different ingredients on it. But then to be able to trace back and to truly understand where all these ingredients come from, that's where new technology can truly help you.
Yeah, and also previously you mentioned, Hugo, about the food safety aspects. The traceability is getting more and more important because nowadays we have novel foods coming into the market. And when the novel foods come into the market, you have new disease burden into the population because you have new allergies that are coming up into the chain. People are more prone to that. And this has traditionally been not focused on that much, the food safety aspects. And this kind of blockchain and traceability technologies make it much more valuable to trace these things also for the consumers where they are getting their food from. So it is more about awareness also from the consumer's perspective.
So it sounds like there is both the question of complexity of what can be achieved with these products, starting out for, say, for example, as Joost mentioned, a single product or a single origin product or a single product going from a pineapple only to going to multiple compounds within a product, and then also a development of trust within the network in order to really establish these traceability platforms or these platforms in general. I guess one of the main questions that comes about from this is, how do you deal with this fear of this catch-22, where in order to establish these platforms, you need to have a certain amount of trust and data being published on them in order to validate their existence, but at the same time, nobody really wants to be able to take that first step, or nobody wants to take that risk of, I will be the one to sort of put my information first. Is there a way that we can alleviate that, or is that always going to be a problem that just sort of we need to bite down on our mouthpieces and just sort of grit through the problem? And Hugo, I'll start with you.
Sorry, I didn't get the question, to be honest.
So how does one then overcome the fear that could be available within the adoption of such traceability infrastructures? Because we're saying that it's about seeing the information that is being published, and it's about sort of this trust that is being built over time, where you can see the backlog of usage, perhaps, of a traceability platform. But it's also a complex issue where you're not only looking to sort of track single products, you're looking to track multiple compounds within a product. So you're looking to get multiple stakeholders in order to truly make a traceability platform
Yes.
as efficiently as possible.
Yeah, what you're asking is basically what are the incentives that we could provide to the stakeholders so that they are able to be the first one to adopt the technology, right?
Yeah, well, the incentive, certainly the
Yeah.
upcoming regulations are a good incentive. But I think also companies need to look differently at data. In the past, product data were very much seen as proprietary and were kept as a secret and very reluctantly shared, if at all, in a supply chain. I think that data are actually part of the product, and therefore the data should flow with the product. And if we look at product with data as added value to the product, then you have a completely different mindset in how you look at data sharing for products.
I think here's the key point. So data travels, product travels, and they travel they travel apart from each other, but you have to keep the link to them. I think that's interesting. And then of course data grows over time, as such. So it's also a kind of not only the network of supply chain, is also the network of data that is actually starting to arise over time. And that's something as well. If you look at retailers, of course, there's always been an interest to know the provenance as such. But and here regulation comes in. You not only now need to prove where it came from, you also need to prove that you can prove where it came from. So it's kind of almost, it's a double X that particularly EU is rolling out. The US is actually lagging behind in this. Asia is picking up there as well. That maybe it's not about the provenance, it's the proof that you can prove it is becoming more important. And by that system, intrinsically, food quality, food safety should improve. If you can't check all the food, then check how you check the food. I think that's a key driver for change in the whole food supply chain. So which means actually monitoring, auditing, reporting based on, for example, blockchain-based systems is becoming a key element of the IT infrastructure of the retailers of today and the future.
It's a potential benefit then, given the amount of work that would have to come out really for the auditing of all of this information, that will be really quite a challenge for any individual if they had to sit down and really do this manually. Technologies such as AI is now very much in the news, given the capabilities that it's touted to have. What sort of role does technology like that, and just perhaps any other technology that you might be able to mention, what role does that have within the creation of these new traceability platforms?
So, I mean, the modern AI technologies can leverage on the existing blockchain technologies as well, right? So most of the algorithms at this moment that we see with the new also type of generative AI, these technologies will enable all the stakeholders to have a much more reliable system in place. And this technology or this modern machine learning algorithms will allow everybody into the chain to learn from each other. And what is happening more and more is, like, most countries in the Europe at least, they have their own government portals where they provide open data that would enable all the retail stores to harvest this data so that you can back up your food products with that data, which makes it much more valuable for retailers to have a legal protection when something goes wrong.
And also maybe take it a bit from the negative side, but actually when we're talking about food traceability, I think machine learning will come in place because you will very soon. We already know about greenwashing, but you are the same. So when you talk about these kind of systems, you need to think about fraud protection, fraud prevention actually, and quality protection. So this is actually a place where indeed machine learning will come in place to find anomalies all happening on the blockchain. The blockchain itself will not detect this. You need machine learning technologies, other mining technologies to add that additional layer on top of blockchains to provide actually what is common use in retail as well. When they have a data warehouse, they have all kind of mining system in place to look at this. You will see the same in blockchain-based solutions, that these will come into place, and they are already getting in place to get the maturity level that you would need for enterprise-wide supply chain-wide solutions.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, Joost, that you mentioned that AI is a layer on top of the blockchain technology. So, if there is a disruption in a specific supply chain that happens, let's say, for example, 90% of the vanilla in the world is actually produced in Madagascar. But once there is a tsunami or any kind of weather disaster happens in this country, the other countries take up the role of Madagascar. What happens then? You have a lot of fraudulent products in the market, vanilla specifically. AI technology will allow you to pinpoint where these fraudulent places could potentially be, so that you are able to mitigate those risks when you are trying to import these products from a specific country.
And now to your point, Alex, so where does the drive come from? Of course, a lot of people in the blockchain world say we don't like regulation, but actually regulation is mandatory for this because it will help also to better define what you need, how you develop those kind of solutions to fit for purpose. So in this case, regulation is a good thing, not just from, I would say, consumer protection, but also from development of the technology towards even a sustainable economical value for retailers.
Yeah, it also does. Oh, please, Anand.
Yeah, also it is getting more and more prominent now. Consumers are asking. There is also a demand from the consumers. It's not only about the regulation. Consumers want to know the product I am eating, where is it coming from? Is it sustainable? Was it produced in a sustainable way? Does it come from a specific place where there is a biohazard that is not suitable for me if I'm suffering from certain condition? So these are the questions that are also raised by consumers at this moment. So it is both sides.
There seems to be a possibility then of not having only members of the supply chains be a part of these traceability platforms, but then the very parties that we talk about for auditing, for testing in terms of lab quality, there's a possibility to add those as well into the chain, which would then transform it into more of a network, more of an ecosystem, as Hugo was alluding to, that it's not just sort of specific actors doing their one role. It's you're really putting as much data forward in order to be able to use it in a way that is constructive both for consumer demands, for regulatory demands, and to just create a stable foundation for where your foodstuffs are coming from, what you're eating, and other such questions that people might have. What I'm going to do now, since we have 20 minutes left, I'm going to open it up to the floor. Thank you very much to our panelists for the discussion so far. There are already a couple of points that have been asked, so we will jump into the first question by Peter. I know Marika's already given a question as well, but I would like the panelists' view on the question as well. And the question is, what is more important, traceability for the customer or traceability to avoid huge food waste before it even reaches the customer? Peter, if you're here and you can hear us, if you want to elaborate any more on the question that you gave, otherwise I will throw it back to the panelists.
No, it's okay. You can throw it to the panelists.
Perfect. Then please.
So, I mean, what is more important, if is the food waste or, so I think, in my opinion, I think it is important for both the consumers as well as for the regulators. So for the consumers, it is also important to know, that is how you see it from citizen science perspective, like consumers want to know where the product is coming from and were there any ethical aspects that were compromised in the production of this product.
Maybe I have a question to Peter. So just to elaborate on your question, so how would you see food waste? Do you mean to be tracked or to be traced before it happens? Or because I can see absolutely the sustainable angle to it. I'm just trying to see how would you like to get this covered from a blockchain or a traceability point of view.
Well, if you look to what's going on, at least the discussion in the Netherlands, there is a huge discussion going on about waste between retailer and consumer. And the consumer buys too much that he doesn't use, so you should buy less to have less waste. But if you look to the supply chains, even before it gets to the retailer, then the food waste is much more than the discussion we have in between retail and consumer. And in my opinion, because it's very column-wise organized, nobody puts enough attention to that waste, because at the end, it's all that the consumer pays for waste in the supply chain.
Yeah. So actually, I mean, I just wanted to make a quick remark here. There has been a trend now in collaboration with the universities as well as the supermarkets, where the trend is shifting for demand-based production of food. So what is going to happen, that is what everybody is going towards, in the direction where you would have to order it, the product that is going to be produced for you in future. So if you want to eat a salad which is not seasonal at this moment, you have to first order it before it can be produced. So that is one way where we are thinking at this moment that would reduce the food waste.
Yeah, so I would say that, of course, when you gather data, there's all kinds of things you can manage. And I'm sure that, for instance, in your choice of suppliers, if part of the data set is information on food waste, as a buyer, you could try to find those companies that have the least waste. You could try to manage that. But when I saw the question, I was really thinking about replenishment systems, which are maybe the cousin of traceability system of systems or tracking systems, where, of course, being very precise about how much do you actually order of a food is extremely important, because if you can properly manage that, then you are able to prevent food waste from happening.
Yeah, and to Hugo's point, so I wouldn't say that blockchain are the first systems for this. Maybe, of course, if you look at minerals in blockchain, you have the concept of mass balance. So what goes in should come out. You may apply this as well to certain of them and then feed it back in exactly in replenishment systems to learn from that. But I wouldn't use blockchain as the first systems to go after food waste in the B2B sector. I do take your point, Peter, that probably it's but it's not so much associated with food waste. So I do see your point. I'm just struggling to see where blockchain helps in that point as for now. But I can see, as I mentioned, maybe as you could think about batches of food, you could easily see a batch. Actually, you could give a batch a value, and then of course what goes in the blockchain should come out of the blockchain. So you could do kind of as it called a mass balance construction that shows how much is lost across itself. But it's definitely an interesting question. Thank you for that.
Marike, you had a point to add.
Yeah, I'm dying to interfere. Yeah, I mean, on the food waste, right? So 40% of food gets lost, which is ridiculous. Like almost half the food that we produce doesn't get anywhere in a nutrition purpose. So a core reason for that is that we have no data. I don't know whoever remembers that when Corona hit in, but I know that Hugo very well remembered. There was no idea of where what was, right? And the core and only single reason for that is we have no digital data on the actual status of the logistical location of food, let alone quantities and qualities of food, right? And that is definitely where you have to have a reliable, immutable infrastructure. That's my 2 cents.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We'll move quickly through the questions that we have here. Ronald asked a question about the starting process. How does one put information onto a blockchain? So perhaps, Joost, you can give a brief idea of how that can happen, and then we'll move on to our other questions.
Sure. Yeah, I think this is the key question, of course. You don't want to get rubbish, or you don't get to want fraudulent information to be put on and travel across the blockchain. So at every inflection point where you're going from physical to data, you need to put some checks in place. So checks could be, of course, quantity that need to be checked against the system. That could be paper-based. You want to transfer, of course, to digital. You could use, for example, facial recognition of those a limited number of people that at the farmer level can input this data. You have, as I mentioned, mass balance. So what goes in should come out. You have mobile GPS geofencing that you could use as such to really see if someone is uploading some information to blockchain. Are they actually in the area, in the plot that is supposed this food comes from? So you have to triangulate different technological means to ensure that the data is as accurate as you can when it's going to be put on the blockchain. 100% accurate, never going to be, but once on the blockchain, it lives on there, and then you, of course, have 100% traceability of it. But you have to pay a lot of attention, of course, on the insertion point. But mobile technologies, GPS, geofencing, labeling, QR codes, all those things together, triangulating this information is already, for example, in the mining industry, that's happening already and could be applied pretty, I don't say pretty easily, but much more, at least in the food industry.
So there was, Ronald, that's a thumbs up. I will assume that that is an answer to the question. So I will move on to a question from Ruthie, who asks, how do you suggest the companies leverage their traceability systems to target support to suppliers to implement sustainable practices? So as I understand it, and Ruthie, please give an elaboration onto this question if I will not be able to do so, is how can we then better connect to suppliers? And I'm assuming this goes particularly to farmers or first mile actors. How do we then leverage these sort of traceability platforms in order to best be able to support these practices? Because we talk about sustainability, we talk about really having secure food systems, but then how can we actually sort of put our money where our mouth is on top of traceability? How do we help those who are a structural part of this entire food system?
Shall I try to answer that? Okay. So the thing is, like, there is no protocol that says that what is sustainable and what is not sustainable. So there is nothing standardized as of now at the European level. But there is a discussion where we are trying to address what sustainability could mean. And these parameters could be put in place that would define what products are sustainable and what products are not sustainable. But there is a very gray area there, which has not been standardized yet. But it is only a matter of time when these things will become very standardized, at least in Europe.
Okay, Marika, you had a point to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's debatable. Anand, you say there are no protocols on sustainability, right? But there definitely are. There are protocols in terms of decent work. I was just typing that, but there are also protocols on CO2. There are protocols on deforestation. There are many protocols.
Yes, so there are
Don't follow the protocols, and we don't make it punishable.
yes. So there is also land use indexes there. There is also CO2 index there, water usage, land usage, biodiversity. So these indexes are there. I agree with Marika. However, these are not mandatory or put in place, right, Marika? If I'm correct. And what parameters come together to define what is sustainable or not? That is something, at least for me, not yet there. I'm not sure if
Yeah, I mean, I actually think we don't need more protocols. I've been involved when I was still working at Wageningen in tons of research and measurement tools for CO2 calculations. And it's really millions that we spend on those, right? So we have protocols for those. It's a matter of politicians adopting this as agenda points, and they don't. They talk about shooting wolves, yes or no. And it is a matter of the European making this enforceable.
yes.
And I think I'm very pleased that finally on deforestation something is happening, which they should have done 10 years ago. And I think it's really, there's a big political agenda here that needs moving. But I see Ruth has a question. But my statement is we don't need more research, no more protocols. We need to get laws and make it finable. What's that? Make it punishable.
Anand, I'm going to jump in and have Ruth give her point. Perhaps it's an elaboration on her question.
Yeah, it's an elaboration on my question. Thank you. So for me, it isn't just putting it into legislation, although that is obviously helpful, but the fact that investors are asking for this and now there's regulatory reporting, which actually means that the level of traceability, the things of which as a company I am required to report on my supply chain, and therefore which I require in my traceability system for whatever's coming into my business, is just rising dramatically. And the difficulty with that is it's going to put massive pressure on the smallest producers. It's going to actually knock out of many of those chains, those people who don't have the resources to be able to also provide this massive amount of information on their water use and their deforestation and all of those things. And my concern, so I worked in voluntary sustainability certifications, so Rainforest Alliance Sustainable Agriculture certification. So I can tell you there's plenty of protocols that can tell you what you need to measure. But my concern is so much focus on the technology. How do we get to show what it is? And who's doing stuff with that information to actually make everything more sustainable? Because we'll have more and more information showing up.
But let's work on that.
Further and further away.
So Ruth, you work for the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, right?
I did.
So
I did.
Adopt an infrastructure, right? Get it going. I mean,
I don't work with them anymore.
Oh, well, get somebody who works there. Adopt an infrastructure. So there are tools. I mean, the thing is, people need tools, right?
And willingness and incentives. And the incentives are not there because actually this is costly and there's no reward in it currently.
Yeah, and everybody's waiting for the other to move. So that gives us, a lot of time wasted, which is very expensive that nobody realizes. But we're wasting loads of money that we can spend on good stuff.
Yeah.
So the incentive thing is an interesting. Of course, here comes a part of the blockchain where it could help. Of course, I'm not talking about pure financial incentive, of course, but you could imagine. I just came out of a other discussion of the blockchain week, where we're talking about how about if you would incentivize people because if they share something, they get something, right? And it doesn't have to be translated in fiat money, but it could be, of course, if you look at the farmer side, it could be actually some tokens that give you an additional discount on whatever. Or so you have to put. I wasn't in the past involved in some of those system, and indeed, it tried to incentivize at the place where it's happening. I'm not promoting here that people get cryptocurrencies, but at least token exactly here I see Ruth going exactly. But at least the blockchain technology might give you means of tokenization that could be used for purpose that makes sense for the end user, or let's say the start of the chain, but also across the chain. So I think that's an interesting concept which could help, because just brand recognition is nothing valuable, I think, for a farmer in itself. It may be for the processor, but it only lives only 2 years. But some recognition and tokenization could help. So this is really new technology, right? And we should not mix it up with cryptocurrencies. Really talking about incentives to be used in the supply chain itself. So it's a supply chain. That's an interesting concept that could be spent much more attention to, and one of the hidden gems of blockchains.
I think Sophia raises a good point in the comments where she says that incentives need to be at the level of each individual business. And then the question becomes, how does specific technology help the business become more agile, more profitable, etc.? So there we could look at, say, for example, the addition of third-party service providers being added to these traceability infrastructures, which could then provide sort of services on top of just traceability, where you could have things like microfinancing of farmers, carbon accreditation by these smaller businesses to bring back value to these businesses.
Exactly, discounting, whatever.
Exactly. And very shortly, because we're on a time crunch as well, if possible.
I just wanted to hear Marika's opinion about enforcement and incentives. Where do you put a line?
Yeah, that's good. That's a real good question. And this is a discussion that Hugo and I have been having over the past 2 years. You can have good rules, but who's going to enforce them, right?
Yeah.
And this is, if you look at the Netherlands, right, I think we've one of the highest standards. If you look at the capacity that we have in the enforcing organizations, it makes me cry. Really, it makes me cry. I mean, they don't have enough people. They're understaffed. They're under-trained on technology and the beauty of technology, and they can't really do anything. So they're bad. They're sort of they became the bad guys, but they're the good guys. So yeah, again, I don't know. We need to give them more money, and we need to have government and actually our Ministry of Agriculture, hopefully our Ministry of Technology, understand the power of tech in terms of compliance, because we're not using it. It's all paper-based, and that's a problem. And that's a bill that we pick up as consumers, right?
Yeah.
And as taxpayers.
Yeah.
On that remark, looking with one eye.
That's a depressing end, right?
Well, no,
sorry.
It's a very valid part of discussion.
It's a promising end. It's a promise. It's a promise to the future.
Yeah. Okay, but I guess we need everybody who's on the call here to, really work on this agenda and get it going. Because if we wait for the politicians to do it, or the big food brands, they need help. So let's nail it.
So maybe one remark. So I'm in the blockchain week here. Actually, there was one of the lady who's leading actually one of the sandbox initiatives of the EU, and they say the biggest win from that itself is that regulation meets industry meets regulation. I think that's it's both sides need to learn each other, because as an industry, as a technologist, you need to understand what is the regulation that really makes sense, and how it can work in your benefit, also how it can hamper things. But regulation needs, of course, to learn what technology can bring, or even how you can bridge things with technology that legislation doesn't think about. Yeah, exactly.
Hugo was in the industry for a long time. How do you see that? Because I see you puzzled, and I know we have to cut it short here, but I'm keen to hear industry.
Well, yeah, how can I give a short answer given the time? I think the regulators still very much are in the line of, let's ask for reporting and then things will change. It's becoming clearer and clearer that doesn't work. There needs to be a bigger incentive for companies to act. And some big companies do that, but for the smaller companies and for farmers to even join in, it's getting more and more difficult. So we really also need to think about how do we help them provide the supply chain with the right type of information. But again, legislation, and I never thought I would say this, but legislation does help.
As a final remark, then, to all three of the panelists, if there is a final point that you would want the audience here to be left with, what would that point be on retail, on traceability, or just supply chain retail in general? And Anand, I'll start with you.
I mean, I would say that use of technology is going to improve the traceability and will influence all industries alike. That is the only remark that I can make at this moment.
Joost?
Manufacturing, where food, of course, is in fact, the manufacturing is one of the biggest industries in the world. It needs much more technology to mature. It can, because there are good cases. I would say that innovation is happening everywhere. Just embrace a little bit of innovation, bring it in your network. I think that helps. Don't try to do all the innovation yourself. Bring a little bit of innovation in your network, and you're just ahead of the rest of the world.
Last but not least, Hugo.
Yeah, well, use the technology to start managing things in your supply chains.
That is a great way to end this panel. Thank you so much for the three panelists for joining us. Thank you everybody in the call who was a part of this, whether listening, whether questions. It was a great event. Thank you so much for joining us. And hopefully you will be here for many more events that we conduct. Have a great evening, everyone.
Yeah, thank you all.